Before you scroll, before you decide this is just another Hollywood story, stop for a second. Because what you're about to hear isn't just shocking, it changes how you see the entire entertainment industry. This isn't about one celebrity, one scandal, or one set of documents. It's about a pattern that many believe has been hiding in plain sight for decades, protected by silence, power, and influence. And once you see how the pieces connect, it's almost impossible to unsee them. Hollywood is in complete turmoil right now, and the tension inside the entertainment industry feels heavier than it has in years, almost suffocating. What once appeared to be isolated scandals, brief controversies, or easily dismissed headlines is now being re-examined by millions as part of something far larger and far more unsettling. There's a growing sense that these weren't random events at all, but fragments of a much deeper pattern that has been hiding in plain sight. Mel Gibson has re-entered the public conversation with what countless people online are calling his final warning, and the reaction has been immediate and explosive. According to widespread discussion, what he's pointing toward isn't just another Hollywood rumor or recycled accusation. Instead, many believe it's a long-delayed reckoning, one tied to Epstein-related material and an elite web of influence that people claim has quietly operated behind the scenes for decades. As this story unfolds, it feels less like celebrity gossip and more like a slow-burning psychological thriller, unraveling piece by piece in real time, with the entire world watching and waiting for what comes next. Over the past several days, the internet has been completely overwhelmed by a relentless flood of exposés, resurfaced interviews, viral clips, and alleged documents. It began with the sudden explosion of a Diddy-related documentary that claimed to pull back the curtain on his inner circle, instantly igniting non-stop headlines across every major platform. Before that fire had any chance to cool, attention shifted almost immediately to newly circulating Epstein-related files and materials, content many believed would never be released publicly, or would be so heavily censored that the truth would remain permanently buried. But what truly sent shockwaves through social media wasn't just the release itself. It was the claim that the redactions may not have worked as intended. Users alleged that despite thick black lines meant to conceal sensitive information, certain versions of the documents allowed hidden text to be revealed through simple copy and paste methods. Whether every detail of those claims holds up or not, the perception alone was enough to spark outrage. Once people believed the cover-up had failed, the information spread at lightning speed across social media platforms, online forums, and private group chats, fueling massive speculation and pushing the conversation into overdrive. This is where Mel Gibson's long-standing warnings suddenly feel prophetic to many viewers. His message, as people interpret it now, reaches far beyond any single document dump or viral headline. It's about the hidden machinery of Hollywood itself, the pressure to conform, the culture of silence, the manipulation behind success, and the way power can shape what the public is allowed to see and what must remain hidden. Online discussions have increasingly zeroed in on alleged connections between Epstein's social circle and high-profile figures in entertainment, intensifying questions about proximity, influence, and protection. Many believe that powerful individuals are now scrambling to control the narrative, aware that once enough dots are connected, the truth could become impossible to suppress or contain. What intensifies this moment even further is the realization that these warnings didn't come out of nowhere. Other voices have been sounding the alarm for years. Corey Feldman has repeatedly spoken about exploitation within the entertainment industry, particularly involving child performers, and the fear that comes with calling out people who wield real power. Cat Williams, in his own blunt and unapologetic way, has long claimed that Hollywood operates according to unspoken rules enforced not only by contracts, but by pressure, rewards, and quiet punishment. Whether people fully agree with these voices or not, their words keep resurfacing because they align with a growing sense of unease. More and more people are beginning to believe that Hollywood isn't just an industry. It's a system designed to protect itself, even if that means sacrificing truth, accountability, and people along the way. To truly understand why this moment feels so explosive, you have to look back. Long before today's chaos, Mel Gibson described Hollywood as a bizarre, unsettling place, one that doesn't take long to change you once you step inside. He explained that when newcomers arrive, they're still grounded in the real woe. RLD still carrying values, instincts, and perspectives shaped outside the industry. People seem drawn to that authenticity at first. They praise it, they reward it, they make you feel special for being different. But according to Gibson, that admiration is only the first step. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, flattery turns into influence. Influence turns into pressure. And before you even realize it's happening, the same system that lifted you up begins reshaping who you are, what you accept, and what you're willing to tolerate in order to stay. Gibson also spoke openly about the strange, uneasy feelings he experienced early in his career, suspicions he couldn't prove but couldn't ignore either. He described secretive behavior, unspoken rules, and an atmosphere where asking too many questions made people visibly uncomfortable. He compared Hollywood to a town straight out of a horror movie, where a stranger walks into a quiet bar and suddenly everyone goes silent, as if they all know something you don't. At first, he tried to convince himself that he was paranoid, that he was imagining things, that no entire industry could really function that way. But over time, he came to believe that some of the darkness he sensed wasn't imagined at all. It was real, it was structural, and it was deeply embedded in the way the industry operated, hidden behind glamour, success, and carefully controlled narratives. Eventually, Mel Gibson admitted that he reached a personal and professional breaking point. What had once felt like success, validation, and creative fulfillment slowly transformed into something darker and more unsettling. He described Hollywood as a place where the longer you stay, the more your mind begins to wander into horrifying possibilities, thoughts you initially dismiss as paranoia or exaggeration. At first, you tell yourself those fears couldn't possibly be real. You assume you're overthinking, reading too much into things, letting stress distort your perspective. But Gibson explained that over time, something changes. The longer you remain inside the system, the more you begin to realize that some of those imagined scenarios might not be imagined at all. Some of them, he suggested, may be grounded in uncomfortable truths. Feeling overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and deeply disillusioned, Gibson made a decision that shocked many at the height of his career. He stepped away from the spotlight entirely. He walked away from premieres, interviews, red carpets, and the constant scrutiny that comes with fame. Instead of fighting to stay relevant, he chose distance. He returned to Australia and deliberately stripped his life down to its most basic elements. He lived quietly. He worked on a farm. He built fences by hand, dug holes in the ground, tended to cattle, and immersed himself in physical, honest labor. For Gibson, this wasn't just about rest or burnout recovery. It was about survival. It was an attempt to reclaim his sense of self and reconnect with something solid and real after years inside an industry he believed could slowly dismantle a person's identity if they stayed too long. Now, years later, as Epstein-related materials resurface once again, many people online believe those documents offer a disturbing glimpse into just how far Jeffrey Epstein's social world allegedly extended. Discussions across social media suggest that his network reached far beyond one industry, crossing into politics, finance, royalty, and entertainment. According to online speculation, Epstein's influence thrived in elite spaces where access, secrecy, and power overlapped, spaces that were rarely questioned and even more rarely challenged. It's critical to state clearly that many names circulating in these discussions have not been charged with crimes related to these materials, and appearing in photographs, flight logs, or social gatherings does not itself prove wrongdoing. However, the public reaction goes beyond legal definitions. It's rooted in trust, or rather, the collapse of it. People feel they are witnessing a long-standing pattern of proximity and privilege that allowed certain individuals to operate with minimal scrutiny, shielded by status, wealth, and powerful connections. That sense of distrust only grows stronger when people believe information is being restricted, delayed, or quietly altered after the fact. Online users have claimed that certain documents were removed, modified, or made increasingly difficult to access shortly after being released. Whether those changes were routine, legally required, or something else entirely, the impact was immediate and profound. For many observers, it reinforced the belief that powerful interests are still attempting to control the narrative, deciding what the public is allowed to see and what must remain hidden. Once that suspicion takes hold, every redaction feels deliberate. Every missing page raises alarm. Every blacked-out name becomes symbolic of something larger, the idea that the full truth is still being guarded, protected, and filtered before it ever reaches public view. Gibson has also spoken openly about human trafficking as one of the most disturbing and urgent crises facing the modern world, with particular emphasis on the trafficking of children. He has repeatedly stressed that awareness is the first and most crucial step toward stopping it, a message that cuts through the noise and reframes the entire discussion. This isn't just about celebrities, scandals, or online theories. It's about real victims, real trauma, and real lives that are permanently altered. At the same time, this subject often becomes tangled with extreme speculation online, where outrage can blur into sensationalism. That's why many argue it must be approached with seriousness, restraint, and responsibility. The focus, they insist, should remain on justice, accountability, and protecting the most vulnerable, rather than turning tragedy into spectacle or allowing shock value to overshadow empathy. Eventually, Mel Gibson admitted that he reached a breaking point, one that wasn't sudden, but built slowly over time. What had once felt like success, recognition, and creative purpose gradually became something far more unsettling. He described Hollywood as a place where your mind begins to wander into dark territory the longer you stay, where you start imagining horrifying possibilities you immediately try to dismiss. At first, you convince yourself those thoughts are irrational. You tell yourself you're stressed, paranoid, or simply overwhelmed by fame. You assume the problem is you. But Gibson explained that over time, that inner voice becomes harder to silence. The patterns become clearer. The unease grows heavier. And eventually, you begin to realize that some of the scenarios you once brushed off as impossible might not be imagined at all. They might be reflections of something real, something hidden beneath the surface. As the pressure mounted, the glamour faded. The excitement of success no longer outweighed the psychological toll of staying inside an industry he no longer trusted. Gibson described feeling overwhelmed, disillusioned, and emotionally drained, as though the environment itself was slowly eroding his sense of self. At the height of his career, when walking away seemed unthinkable to most, he chose to step out of the spotlight entirely. He didn't just take a short break or disappear quietly, he removed himself from the machine. He left the premieres, the interviews, the endless scrutiny, and returned to Australia, intentionally choosing a life stripped of excess and spectacle. He worked on a farm. He built fences with his own hands. He dug holes, tended land, worked with animals, and immersed himself in physical labor. These weren't symbolic gestures, they were grounding acts. For Gibson, this wasn't simply rest or burnout recovery. It was a form of self-preservation. He believed that staying inside Hollywood for too long could dismantle a person piece by piece, until they no longer recognized who they were or what they stood for. Now, years later, as Epstein-related materials resurface once again, many people online believe those documents provide a disturbing glimpse into just how far Jeffrey Epstein's social world allegedly extended. Conversations across social media suggest his network was not confined to one industry or one group, but stretched across politics, finance, royalty, and entertainment. According to widespread speculation, Epstein moved comfortably within elite spaces where access was tightly controlled, questions were discouraged, and influence outweighed accountability. These were environments built on discretion and power, where connections mattered more than transparency. It's important to state clearly that many names circulating in online discussions have not been charged with crimes related to these materials, and appearing in photos, guest lists, or social gatherings does not itself prove wrongdoing. Still, the public response is not driven purely by legal standards. It's driven by trust, or the realization that trust has been repeatedly broken. People feel they are witnessing a long-standing pattern of proximity and privilege, one that allowed certain circles to operate beyond meaningful scrutiny for years. That sense of distrust only intensifies when people believe information is being restricted, delayed, or quietly altered after its release. Online users have claimed that certain documents were removed, edited, or made increasingly difficult to access shortly after becoming public. Whether those changes were procedural, legal, or something else entirely, the effect was immediate and profound. For many observers, it reinforced the belief that powerful interests are still attempting to manage the narrative, deciding which details are visible and which remain hidden. Once that suspicion takes hold, every redaction feels intentional. Every missing page becomes a warning sign. Every blacked-out name is interpreted not as protection, but as evidence that the full truth is still being guarded behind layers of influence and authority. Gibson has also spoken openly about human trafficking as one of the most disturbing and urgent crises facing the modern world, particularly the trafficking of children. He has emphasized that awareness is the first and most essential step toward stopping it, a message that cuts through speculation and redirects attention to what truly matters. This conversation, he has suggested, is not about celebrities, scandals, or internet drama. It's about real victims, real trauma and harm that leaves permanent scars. At the same time, this issue often becomes entangled with extreme online speculation, where outrage can easily transform into sensationalism. That's why many argue it must be approached with care, seriousness, and responsibility. The focus, they insist, should remain on justice, accountability, and the protection of the most vulnerable, not on turning suffering into spectacle or allowing shock value to eclipse empathy. The conversation naturally expands into how Hollywood is believed to control narratives, because for many people, this is the moment where individual stories stop feeling separate and start feeling connected. The concern is no longer just about scandals, accusations, or controversial figures. It's about how consistently the public's attention is guided, redirected, and shaped. In countless viral discussions, figures like Joe Rogan and Cat Williams have argued that messaging and propaganda are not accidental side effects of entertainment. According to them, they are structural features of the system itself. Stories don't simply rise or fall on their own merit. Some narratives are elevated, repeated, and normalized until they feel unavoidable, while others are quietly discouraged, delayed, or buried beneath layers of distraction until they fade from public consciousness. In this environment, success often appears less about talent alone and more about alignment, who you work with, what you're willing to endorse, and which lines you're careful never to cross. Cat Williams has gone even further, pointing to what he describes as repeating patterns and symbolic tests that surface again and again in Hollywood culture. In his view, these aren't random moments or coincidences, but signals, ways the system measures compliance, loyalty, and silence. Those who go along with expectations are rewarded with visibility, opportunity, and protection. Those who resist, question, or refuse often find themselves stalled, sidelined, or slowly erased from relevance. Whether people see these patterns as deliberate manipulation, cultural inertia, or something in between, the result is the same: a growing belief that Hollywood operates under a hidden rulebook, a rulebook insiders learn to navigate instinctively, while outsiders are never meant to read. As the internet continues digging, it transforms from a passive audience into something far more active and relentless. People scour old interviews, forgotten talk show appearances, archival footage, guest lists, leaked photos, and decades-old articles with obsessive focus. They compare timelines, trace associations, and map out who appeared where, with whom, and how often. They notice which names seem to orbit the same circles again and again, and which names never overlap at all. Entire online communities now exist solely to connect dots, debate theories, and archive information before it can disappear. Some conclusions may be speculative, and some may be shaped by emotion or bias, but the sheer intensity of the scrutiny reveals something deeper than curiosity. It shows how completely public trust has eroded. After decades of watching power shield itself through money, legal firewalls, public relations machinery, and carefully polished images, many people no longer accept official explanations at face value. Silence now feels suspicious, denials feel rehearsed, and reassurance feels hollow. The most difficult and most emotionally heavy part of this entire conversation centers on long-standing warnings about child exploitation in the entertainment industry. This is where speculation gives way to grief and anger. Corey Feldman has spent years describing what he believes is an environment where young performers are surrounded by adults with unchecked access, authority, and influence. An environment where fear, dependency, and silence can allow abuse to continue without consequence. He has spoken about how the damage done to children in these situations doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling. It follows them into adulthood, shaping their mental health, relationships, sense of safety, and ability to trust. According to Feldman, the cost of speaking out against powerful figures can be devastating. Lawsuits, blacklisting, character assassination, and a relentless effort to discredit the person raising the alarm. Regardless of where one stands on every specific claim, the broader pattern Feldman describes is what has shaken so many people to their core. It's the idea of a system that instinctively protects those with power while isolating those without it. A system where silence is safer than truth, and where exposure carries consequences far heavier than wrongdoing. That imbalance, where influence acts as armor and vulnerability becomes a liability, is what has forced so many to reevaluate Hollywood not as a harmless dream factory, but as an institution capable of profound harm when accountability is absent or actively resisted. This is why so many believe the industry has reached a breaking point. The atmosphere feels fundamentally different now. Not just louder, but sharper, more focused, less willing to be distracted by the next headline or spectacle. People sense that the old walls of protection are cracking, and that the familiar strategies, denial, silence, distraction, carefully timed scandals to bury other scandals, are no longer as effective. In the past, outrage could be managed. If you think what you've heard so far is shocking, understand this clearly. We've barely scratched the surface. In many ways, everything up to this point is just the setup. The next layer doesn't simply add more details. It widens the entire picture. The next video dives deeper into more names, more connections, and more moments that many believe were hidden in plain sight for years. Moments that were ignored because they were inconvenient. Connections that went unquestioned because the right people were involved. Patterns that only become obvious when you finally step back and look at the whole board. So don't stop here. If you truly want to understand how far this web of secrets stretches, click the next video on your screen right now. Watch closely, because the deeper you go, the clearer the patterns become. This stops being about isolated scandals and starts looking like a system, one that many believe protected itself through influence, silence, and carefully controlled narratives. And before you go, this is important. We want to hear from you. After everything you've heard about Mel Gibson, Cat Williams, and the renewed focus on Epstein-related material, what do you think is really happening? Do you believe Hollywood is finally being exposed, with long-buried truths coming into the open? Or does this feel like only the beginning of something even bigger, something that's been building quietly for decades and is only now starting to crack under public scrutiny? Drop your thoughts in the comments, read what others are saying, join the conversation. And if you want to stay ahead of what's coming next, make sure you watch the next video. Because once you see what connects next, you'll understand why so many people believe this story is far from over. Redirected or simply waited out. Today, information moves too fast, archives live forever, and attempts to suppress discussion often amplify it instead. Many now believe that once the truth begins spreading openly, it cannot simply be forced back into the shadows. Whether this moment leads to genuine accountability or becomes another cycle of outrage remains uncertain. But what feels undeniable is the shift in public awareness. The audience is no longer just watching, it's questioning, cross-checking, remembering, and refusing to move on. And as long as that scrutiny continues, this conversation won't fade quietly. It will keep expanding, growing wider, deeper, and harder to control, challenging an industry that has long relied on silence to survive. If you think what you've heard so far is shocking, it's important to understand that this story is far from finished. In many ways, this is only the outer layer being peeled back. The next chapter goes even deeper, moving beyond what's already surfaced and into territory that many believe has remained deliberately hidden for years. The next video doesn't just introduce a few additional details. It expands the scope entirely. It explores more names, more relationships, more timelines, and more moments that, when viewed in isolation, once seemed insignificant, but together begin to form a much more disturbing picture. These are the kinds of connections that some believe were always there, quietly sitting in plain sight, overlooked because no one was supposed to connect them. So don't stop here. If you really want to understand how far this web of secrets stretches, click the next video on your screen and follow the trail further. Watch carefully, because as the layers continue to unfold, familiar stories start to look very different. Patterns begin to emerge, repeated behaviors start to stand out, and questions that were once brushed aside suddenly feel impossible to ignore. This stops being about individual scandals and starts becoming about a system, one that many believe protected itself through influence, silence, and distraction. And before you go, we want to hear from you. After everything you've heard about Mel Gibson, Cat Williams, and the renewed focus on Epstein-related material, what do you think this moment really represents? Do you believe Hollywood is finally being exposed, with long-buried truths coming into the open? Or does this feel like only the beginning of something even bigger, something that's been building quietly for decades and is only now starting to crack under the weight of public scrutiny? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation isn't fading away anymore. It's growing, it's spreading, and what happens next may depend on how many people choose to keep watching, keep questioning, and refuse to look away.